I'm Erica Lukes, host of UFO Classified. For me, life isn't simply black and white. Life is full of many unknowns. It is my goal to travel the world and to work with the world's leading experts in the hopes of making groundbreaking discoveries. Join me on UFO Classified Friday nights at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on KCOR.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
When we are asked to suspend all our rational thoughts, to forget our obsolete critical faculties, to throw control overboard, then the time has come to take all the data and go away with it to a quiet place to think. My guess is the problem will not be taken seriously or studied by many scientists until it has begun to generate a very high degree of public awareness, and then the approach will be an entirely classical one. Millions of dollars to consultants, research institutes, thousands of questionnaires, field investigators with glass bottles, sociologists feeling correlation matrices, medical professionals, personnel adjusting electrodes over the frontal lobe of ranchers. But this will only be, in my opinion, another wrinkle in the learning curve, another step in conditioning. There is a strange urge in my mind. I would like to stop behaving as a rat pressing levers. Even if I have to go hungry for a while, I would like to step outside the conditioning maze and see what makes it tick. I wonder what I would find. Perhaps a terrible superhuman monstrosity, the very contemplation of which would make a man insane. Perhaps a solemn gathering of wise men, or the maddening simplicity of an unattended clockwork. That was Dr. Jacques Vallée from the Invisible College back in 1974. And if you carefully go back and look at the work that he has put forward decade after decade, you will find little bits of information that should lay out for you what is taking place. What is taking place is major manipulation. What is taking place are people who are creating this New Age movement back in the late 60s, people who are inserting ideas simply to create covers so they can garner funding, so they can steer the narrative and, in my opinion, do things that are very, very despicable. And nothing can demonstrate that more than what has taken place with Skinwalker Ranch. I have watched my husband, Chris Marks, go through the process of learning about the things that were taking place there. I have watched his colleague, Chris Bartell, go through the process of learning about it and not having answers, reaching out to new ownership and not getting answers. I often watch Chris as he posts on social media, and there are times when I definitely reprimand him. Or I say, what are you doing? And, now it is becoming clear to me, and I fully support him because my husband is scared. He is angry. He is rightfully angry, and he has every reason to go on social media and take on the people that are keeping information from him, that are lying about things. This is very critical, and when I started my research into this, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I believe we were all here for the common good. And I now know that is simply not the case. And so as you listen to my shows over the weeks, the years, you will see me going from somebody who fully supported an organization that is very toxic to somebody who was starting to ask questions about key players who have crafted these personalities and have put themselves out like they are saviors in the community. Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, and the list goes on and on. So I ask you all to be very diligent. I ask you to do your homework, and I ask you to understand that this isn't just fun and games. This isn't us, thinking about the tall whites coming in and the little gray brothers and all of these things. These are people's lives, and we have to take it seriously. I want to just, before we get to our amazing guest tonight, I want to just mention or read a quote from Jeremy Corbell that he posted on social media. He says that we're not talking about clandestine operations against unwitting individuals, as we typically can't control the UAP experience to orchestrate that, and it's something to consider that most people are not nefarious by nature, but rather curious and moral. But mark my words, all roads lead back to Skinwalker Ranch, or maybe all roads in this mystery spring from Skinwalker Ranch. My Jeremy, you must have a lot of faith in people. I certainly don't have a lot of faith in you, as I have seen all of the things that you have done to try to discourage people from speaking out. But then again, you probably know the truth and you're just too worried about your career to do anything about it. But anyway, there you have my opening monologue. It's a little spicy, but I'm on a point. There is more information coming out all the time. And my guest this evening is somebody who I have a great deal of respect for, and who has been digging deeper than most of the people I know. I have learned a great deal from him. Keith Basterfield has been engaged in the field of UFO research since '68. He lived in the United Kingdom and then relocated to Austria. He was the Continental Coordinator for Australia and New Zealand for the Mutual UFO Network. He stepped down in '98. He also facilitated a national level Australian Abduction Studies Center and has worked with APRO and several other organizations. He has been published in many organizations. His blog is the best, in my opinion. I also have to just give a shout out and big thanks to Kirk Collins, who has done amazing work in that regard as well. As of late, I appreciate that. He is, by trade, he was looking into, and Keith, I want to ask you about this because your bio is so long and so robust, but I mean, you were looking into, and you did a lot with the professional psychology research, and also you were really looking into close encounters from Australia, and you did a lot of work with this, and I think that's fascinating. Can you just tell us a little bit more about your background and the things that you've researched?
Hello there, Erica. Yes,
hello.
Certainly I can do that. I guess my interests have spread across the entire spectrum as particular areas of topics caught my attention. But one of the biggest ones I got into was back in the mid-90s, when a group of us here in Australia saw the same sort of stories about abductions emerging that were coming from the US and from other places in the world. And so we formed a little network of health professionals and researchers. And for 3 years, we concentrated solely on looking at all of those kind of accounts. There weren't great numbers here in Australia. If I was to put a number on it, I'd say maybe around 100, 150 accounts we looked at. But each one of those, we delved quite deeply. So, for example, a psychologist and myself would sit and interview an individual for hours, just chatting to get to know about their personal history, their background, their experiences, their abduction accounts, their medical history. And we'd work with them with their consent to do a fairly deep dive into the individual's background and what they had experienced. What we were looking to do was to put the whole abduction experience into context. Many people think that abduction experience is perhaps just a one-off occurrence. You're sleeping in your bedroom or driving a car when an experience happens. But what we found is that each individual tended to have a very long history of both UFO sightings, one or more abductions, and a whole history of paranormal phenomena, which we couldn't really unwind from the UFO side of things. So we spent a number of years trying to get to the bottom of what we thought might be the cause of all of that. And like everyone else, we ran into more puzzles and pieces of the puzzle than we could really answer. But that was one of the biggest research projects that I've been involved with, and that resulted ultimately in attending a 9-day conference which was held at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. back in the 90s, where about 100 researchers from all over the globe who were looking at abductions came together. And we had all the big names that listeners would be familiar with that got together and just talked about abductions nonstop for 9 days. And eventually a rather large, I think about a 500-page proceedings came out of that conference, which is still available, I think, through Amazon. And that's probably the most fascinating period of intense research into one particular topic that I've been involved in over the time.
And that is amazing. I actually have that, and I've been looking through it over the years, the proceedings. And can you tell us, because I find this really fascinating when you look at abduction research and specifically that one event, who were the people that were behind sponsoring the event?
That was actually Robert Bigelow and the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, who were both, as we're aware, heavily into the subject around about that time. So this was in the era of the Bigelow Foundation back in 92, I think it started. And both of them behind the scenes. I don't think many people were aware at the time who was actually sponsoring that conference. But both of those people have been behind the scenes for many years and have plowed, as we know with Robert Bigelow, a lot of money into it. But to the same extent, the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein was ploughing a lot of his personal money into researching the same topic and funding the same group of people that we talk about the whole time: the Hal Puthoffs, the Bud Hopkins, the David Jacobs, the Linda Moulton Howes of the world.
And it is really fascinating for me to dig into this and to look at all of the people that were there. And it is my understanding that Dr. John Mack, who was a pioneer in the field, was actually did work or receive funding from Bigelow. Is that correct?
Yes, that's definitely reported by Jacques Vallée in his diaries and other people. And certainly I think John Mack acknowledged that at the time when he was with us, that he was being funded. I met him once when he came out to Australia, and I think at that point his trips were being funded by Robert Bigelow, yes.
And it is interesting to see all these threads. And, you mentioned Linda Moulton Howe and some of these other names. I, as you know, and you wrote a great article, I have been looking into Bigelow and some of the people involved, and it's been funny to see with the Bigelow Foundation that back in that time frame there was a radio show that was funded by Bigelow that was the precursor to Coast, and it was the same people. And I know that Angela Thompson-Smith, who was on my show a couple weeks ago, was mentioning the fact that the very first interview that they put together for this show was Dr. John Alexander, who was doing a show on non-lethal weapons and UFOs, which I found quite fascinating.
Yes, most definitely. And I think a lot of people are not aware of that precursor show. And what it goes to show is that from the 90s right up until today, Robert Bigelow's methodology has been basically to fund what he was interested in. Not perhaps what the rest of us were interested in, but his interest in those days extended to the paranormal, the afterlife, consciousness, and those are the same sort of topics which pop up with organisations like the TTSA today. So that's a 30-year time span that we have the same people looking at the same areas of interest.
Yeah, and I love putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and I know you do too. You've done such incredible work with all of this. What are your thoughts? Because there's a new show out. We all know about Skinwalker Ranch, and we're hearing things about the fact that there was a 20-year program where the government was studying this, but that certainly isn't the time frame, and that seems to conflict with other time frames that we've been given. So do you have any idea about that and why anybody would make a statement like that?
Yes, I noticed that, and I thought that was quite remarkable, because at one stage up flashed a few words which says that NIDS had been studying it for 20 years, but then the voiceover talked about the US government. And I thought, well, hold on, are we confusing two things here? We're confusing US government study with the National Institute for Discovery Science, which basically was running from the mid-90s to about 2004. So I was confused as to what actually they were referring to there. I couldn't really work it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of taken all of us by surprise. And I know that given, we know in this series that Brandon Fugel, the owner, has definitely stated that he's friends with Bob Bigelow. So I find it, odd that any sort of misstatement would be made about the time frame in which the government was involved with this type of thing. So we'll definitely look into that. I'm sure you will, I will, and we'll make sure we kind of figure out what's taking place. And I also want to mention that, in an article for Popular Mechanics, Tim McMillan specifically states that OSAP is still going on today. So, and I'm sure you caught that as well. What is your thought on that?
Yes, I certainly saw that. And Louis Elizondo has referred to the fact quite often that what he uses the term ATIP as the broader program to the ASAP contract. Elizondo has mentioned a number of times that the program is ongoing. And I guess we've seen an indication of that in recent times with the statement by the Pentagon by Susan Gough recently, to say that there is still an interagency group of people within the Department of Defense who are looking at range incursions. And of course, range incursions to all of us means UFO reports.
And this is going to be an interesting story to watch all of it, develop and things. And I know that you have been very, very busy writing a series of groundbreaking articles as of late. And you specifically, one of the things is bass in South America. And I know we're getting ready to go to break in 5 minutes, but could you tell us a little bit about your co-author, because you had somebody that approached you, from my understanding, and that wanted to work with you, and that sounds like it's amazing that he's come up with this information.
Yes, a French colleague, Marc Sicotti, who's by profession an air traffic controller in France, contacted me and mentioned that he had read a number of my blogs, which got him interested in the whole topic. And having time with the COVID-19 self-isolation, he said, well, why don't we do a project to see what we can dig any more information out about bass? We have been aware for some time, the UFO community has. BAS actually conducted research into UFOs and the paranormal at various places around the globe. And we knew that they had visited South America at some stage. So Mark took the lead and communicated with researchers in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay, amongst other South Australian, that's where I live, South American countries. And he interviewed several individuals who had met members of the BAS team. So we weren't going on hearsay. He was able actually to communicate online with individuals who had met some of the BAS team. And we were told by a former BAS employee that about half a dozen people from BAS in Las Vegas went to South America and met local researchers there. And some of the names will be familiar with listeners. Douglas Kurth, the Marine commander who was involved in the 2004 Nimitz encounter. Lauren Hoffman, who was, I believe, Chris Marx's boss at BAS. He was down in South America. A mysterious character called James Johnson, who was stating he was the BAS chief of investigations, who nobody really has been able to find out much about. He was down there as well as a couple of the investigators, Tim Kuntz and Lucas Gornacek, and a international analyst by the name of Melissa Godoy. So we were able to talk to people who talked to the BAS people down there. And Mark located photographs of BAS members with local researchers. He found that they had a series of emails between BAS team members and South American researchers, which we were able to get hold of, so we could see what was specifically in those emails. And what we found is they were interested in three particular areas: data on UFO sightings, finding pieces of a UFO, and UFO propulsion. And on the sighting side, they were expressing interest in sightings of power plants, especially the Brazilian nuclear power plant, UFOs which crashed, and accounts which involved injury to witnesses. And on the pieces of a UFO, they were asking everyone they met about pieces from crashed UFOs. They asked a number of people down there if they could get them some of these fragments. However, in the end, we couldn't locate anyone who'd actually handed over a piece of something to them. And thirdly, their interest was in UFO propulsion. They were interested in people's opinions as to what made the propulsions on UFOs, what it was all about. And as part of this, they were inquiring about photographs showing halos around the object, which is a very specific thing to be looking for. And they thought apparently that halos around the objects in the photographs were seemingly related to propulsion effects. So after a few months of effort, Mark was able to determine that BAS team made at least 2 trips down to South America, spoke to about half a dozen people who'd met them. And really, in summary, what we learned that was a DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency-sponsored private company using government funds, that is citizens' funds from the US, visited South America, gathered data, and presumably fed all that back to the DIA. So somewhere sitting in someone's vaults are a series of reports about what the BAS team found down there, which we haven't got access to. We can only go on what the researchers who met them told us they were inquiring about. So that, in a nutshell, is what we found out about their visit to South America.
And that is absolutely fascinating to me. And I'm sitting here, watching Chris's next to me, and there are some names that you mentioned there that don't seem to ring a bell with him, which is interesting. And we'll have to talk about that sometime soon. But it is curious to me that, you've got these teams that are sponsored by the DIA, and they are going to these places where people have been injured. They're interested in propulsion. Could there be a chance that they were actually going down there to learn about things that other governments were testing?
Certainly. I mean, one of the things they were talking to local researchers down there about was getting the views on the researchers, their government's views on UFOs, and trying to tap into some of the more technical side of things, which you wouldn't perhaps expect them to be doing. But they were very specifically interested in those things. And time after time, people down there told Mark that was the topics they were focusing on. And particularly injuries, yes.
And that is fascinating, and I want to talk more about that when we get back. I'm here with a researcher that he's one of my favorite, and I've learned so much from him over the years. I'm here with Keith Basterfield. You can go to ufoscientificresearch.blogspot.com to read all of his articles. They are really something. You need to pay attention to this. I'm Erica Lukes. We're going to take a break, and we will be back.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Hello, KCOR listeners. Lorian Fenton here from the Fenton Files to tell you how to watch UFOCon 2020, which was held right before the virus scare in Shelter-in-Place. It was a conference like no other, so don't miss out on the specially priced on-demand replay of what is already the most talked about conference of 2020. Visit UFOCon2020.com. That's UFOCon2020.com.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
In the shadows, a voice cries out. Evidence that you're not alone.
You said my name. What is your name?
Proof that the living and the dead coexist. Or do they? Every Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, join writer, producer, and paranormal investigator Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio as he explores, interviews, and investigates evidence alongside some of the best in the paranormal community and beyond.
6 people killed.
Ghost Box Radio, Wednesday nights exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, because the dead don't sleep. Ghost Box Radio.
We interrupt to bring you this.
Would you like to advertise on KCOR Digital Radio Network?
This is what I'm talking about.
At a fraction of the cost of traditional radio advertising, why not?
Tell them the good news.
Whether you need to promote your next book, product, or service, we can customize a package for just about any budget.
Finally, there is hope for the hopeless.
Why limit yourself to a tiny local market when KCOR can brand you to the world?
Here's all you do.
Visit KCORradio.com or contact our sales department by email at saleskcorradio.com.
We want it now!
See the difference with us by letting us work for you.
This ain't reality TV!
The KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Are you ready to go?
It's showtime!
Here we go, world.
You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. You know that there's no other place I would rather be on a Friday night than here with my friends. I was a guest on Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott last Tuesday, and it was a great show. If you want to go to that archive and listen to it, I really laid it out about my thoughts and feelings about the current situation at Skinwalker Ranch, as well as some of the questions that I have about all of that and the people involved. So definitely go to Spaced Out Radio, listen to that. You can also go to UFOclassified.com to read my latest statement in regards to the ranch. I definitely would recommend that. I want to also thank all of my loyal supporters, my listeners, my friends who are constantly promoting the show, who get in here. I have wonderful feedback. It is very grounded. I know that all of you are looking for answers like I am, and you're on this journey with me, and we can see that there are some red flags that are popping up, especially now when we have to be very diligent and do our homework. I spend hours and hours and hours a week doing this to try to give you the best information, and I will continue to work and do my best to provide that. I am here right now with somebody that I hold in high regard. His name is Keith Basterfield. He's been on my show before. He has written a series of articles on his blog, UFOs scientificresearch.blogspot.com, that I would recommend you read, and it really gives you an in-depth history of the subject. You can go back and look at some of the questions that arose when To the Stars Academy appeared on the scene, and some of the people involved behind the scenes. We were talking about, before we went to break, a specific article that was written on Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. BASS program managers held meetings in Brazil, and I find this is incredible. And so here you have, BAS employees that are going down. You said that there was more than one meeting, and they are looking at power plants, nuclear power plants. They're looking for cases where there are injuries. They're trying to study propulsion. And so give us a little bit more background on some of the things that both you and Mark learned during the process of writing this article.
Okay. Well, one of the obvious things that anyone interested in UFOs would want to look at is propulsion systems. And of course, the team was associated with Robert Bigelow's sister company, Bigelow Aerospace. And one of the interesting things that we came across that we'd never even thought of was they were asking local researchers for views, photographs of UFOs showing halos, and discussing generally what the people down there thought was the propulsion methodology being in use. And what they were talking about was the fact that they would like to take that ideas and that technology, if they could get hold of it, back to use in the sister company Bigelow Aerospace. So not only were they using government funds to inquire about UFO sightings, fragments of UFOs and UFO propulsion, they were looking to sponge up, I suppose is a good word, any information that could be fed back to Robert Bigelow's other company, which was, of course, an aerospace company, looking at putting, or I think they may have at that stage have put a couple of habitats into orbit. So you have government money being used for private purposes, which we hadn't even thought of as a possibility. But we heard that from researchers down in Brazil. And the other thing, of course, you would be interested in is finding a piece of material. If you could find a piece of material that comes from advanced technology, again, you could use that for aerospace purposes. And here you have Robert Bigelow as a sister company who is looking at just that, materials and things they could use for use in space. So again, you've got a real conflict of interest here that you have money coming from government sources with the possibility of part of it being used for, again, private purposes. So there certainly seems a double standard there. And that's something that we hadn't picked up that the BAS team was interested in before.
And all of this is so fascinating. And you look at, the housing of Robert Bigelow obviously spent money to build a location, to build an area where the metamaterials could be stored. And if nobody's finding any metamaterials, I wonder why there was so much money allegedly put into a piece of property and then the structure.
Yes, I mean, that's a real mystery. It's part of the puzzle that I haven't really been able to sort out. That's quite right. I mean, we couldn't find anyone down in South America and in all of those countries who'd handed a piece of material over. We went to specifically the researcher who had a piece of an object which had come down in Bogota in 1976, quite a famous piece which a number of people had analysed. And we asked that researcher, we said, well, did you give any of your fragments to BAS? And he said, no. So why then we would have a building purposely built in Las Vegas to store and presumably analyse that material, and yet we haven't been able to find material going in there. The question is, were there or was there material from other sources already available? And that's, of course, something that Lou Elizondo has referred to on US TV when he was asked a point-blank question as to whether or not he believed the US government had a piece of a UFO, and he answered yes. So it's a great mystery there. The same with TTSA's collection. Elizondo went down recently to, I think last year, to Argentina and retrieved a piece from the Ubatuba object. And so he was following the same path that was followed by BAS 10 years earlier, looking to obtain fragments. And in this instance, he was given a piece of the Ubatuba sample to come back and analyse. And yet the TTSA say they have quite a lot of material. So we're not talking about one piece coming from Ubatuba in Brazil. We're coming to look at a whole collection of material which has somehow been brought together. And yet there's no real information about what that sample or that collection of samples consists of. We'd love to know more about that.
And there are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't they pay about $30,000 for the infamous arts part piece from Linda Moulton Howe?
Yes, I mean TTSA are publicly acknowledged in their reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which they have to do periodically as a company, and in there it quite clearly states that the individual who paid $35,000 for those parts from Linda Moulton Howe was Tom DeLonge. He's specifically named in there as the person who purchased it, not the company, but Tom DeLonge himself. So yes, that's obviously one source of their materials. But there's been a big vacuum since that was announced. There's been a big vacuum in the results of any analysis of any of this material. It's almost as if we're being teased to wait for series 2 of The Unidentified from the History Channel to find about this material. Well, that's not the way science works. Science works by analysing things, putting it in peer review publications, having other people have a double check of the material. But here we have a company who claims to have a whole range of materials, just has gone totally silent on what those materials consist of.
And so, and I just find this interesting. I mean, I know that when, as I've mentioned so many times, my feelings, my beliefs, my ideas have completely taken a 180. And it was interesting when To the Stars Academy first, came out and the big article broke in the New York Times. I mean, I was like, I think most people kind of hopeful that something different would take place and there would be revelations. And, we had the people involved, Colm Kelleher, Chris Mellon, all of these people that I had high hopes for back then. But when we look at the little bits and pieces that they're putting out there, and then a whole bunch that they're not, this just seems more like Bigelow, because Bigelow, as we know, with NIDS, I mean, they were supposed to be very forthright with their research, and they weren't. And so that should be concerning, I would think, to the public who is expecting certain things from people who are making extraordinary claims and then delivering almost nothing.
Yes, I think Gary Nolan, who's working with Jacques Vallée on analysing material, Gary Nolan's been thrown a bit of a spanner at the moment with the COVID-19 virus and is working more in that area. So I think any analysis of fragments has been put to one side temporarily. But even he said that it's a long, hard process to do proper analysis of materials that you really don't know what they are to start off with. It's all very well if you go to somebody and say, I want you to analyse the copper content of this material and give me an isotopic ratio results of it. But when you are handed material which you don't know, in some instances, the source of, and you have to start from basics, and he's always said it will take years to do proper analysis of this. A while ago, I asked Jacques Vallée about his work with Gary Nolan and was looking to see when we might see a peer-reviewed article, because that's what they're aiming for. And Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée came back and said, well, you don't realise how hard doing these analyses are. And he gave me an example. He said the arts parts which have magnesium in them. He said, we've had to find an expert specifically in isotopic ratio testing of magnesium to try and get to the bottom of some questions that we have. And Gary Nolan mentioned he thought that other people who'd been doing this work had perhaps not been as diligent as they had in finding the right experts to talk to. He said there may only be one or two people on the planet who have the ability to do the testing that we're specifically looking for to find anomalies. And I certainly, as a layperson, wasn't aware how complicated that sort of process is.
And that is interesting. And I know that, Nolan was also or is also working with Dr. Kit Green. And that is interesting to me. I mean, is that still an ongoing project?
I'm not aware of what they're currently working on. I know Kit Green, obviously, since about 2006, 2007, has been working on his database and MRI imaging of individuals who've had close experiences, and Gary Nolan was working with him on that. But that seems to have gone fairly quiet at the present moment, and we've no real updates on that program.
When, and do you recall? I mean, and this is just kind of off the top of your head, but do you recall when that all started to go quiet?
It's probably only been in the last couple of years, because Jenny Jacobson's book Phenomena did an interview with Kit Green. I think it was in 2017, and that was probably the last interview that Kit Green gave in detail about the current status of his work. So probably 3 years ago, I would say.
Interesting. Okay, and that was one of those things right after the 2017 article came out again. There was this big, people were looking at Green and Nolan and some of the works the work that they were doing, and there was a big. This was the new big thing, taking MRIs or looking at people that had come in close proximity to these objects who were experiencing injuries, and they were also suffering some pretty severe health effects, which I thought was very curious. But like you said, that's kind of gone quiet at the moment. So we'll see what happens, and if anything happens with the second season of the Skinwalker Ranch show. And if that's addressed. I know it was a little bit with Tom Winterton, and I don't know how. Have you been watching the new TV show?
Yes, somebody has kindly been sending me a copy of each program week by week, so I've been able to catch up with that. And yes, the injury where someone's scalp was lifting off the top of their head, I just can't understand how or what could be causing those kind of injuries. And yet, even the last episode had an MRI scan showing exactly that. So it's really puzzling to the layperson.
Well, it is, and I a few weeks back I had Erling Strand on the show, and he was mentioning, I asked him specifically, he's been researching things for a long, long time, and I asked him, is there a threat to this? Are people getting injured? Because we've heard over and over again from people that were involved at Skinwalker Ranch, people that were involved in NIDS, people like George Knapp and co, that there were really serious injuries that were taking place on the ranch. And yet when I asked Erling about this, he said in the whole time he's done this, they have never had an injury. Nobody's ever been harmed by this.
No, I mean, when you look globally at whether or not there are instances of this, one of the other key hotspots turns out to be South America, and specifically Brazil. I know Jacques Vallée was down there, when was it? I think 2015, he mentioned he took a trip down there to spend several weeks interviewing people who'd had injuries from objects, and he was putting together some more data about that, and he's been collecting similar data to Green for many, many years. But at least he is quite open about the fact that he's doing this research, and he's shared in public lectures, the results of what he's been finding. So that's at least open and transparent there.
Absolutely. And I think it is fascinating, like I mentioned in the monologue, the fact that when you look back at Vallée's work, I mean, you can go back, to the 70s, and there are little breadcrumbs about things that are taking place. And in Forbidden Science, you get, especially his last volume 4, you get these all of this information, if you really, really look, about Bigelow here in the picture, or another person saying A, B, C, and D, Kit Green over here, Puthoff over here. You get the Scientology aspect. You get all of these things, OTO, all of these things that are thrown in and kind of laid out there. And I really encourage people to read his work, because he's giving us important information, and it can easily be glossed over, but we have to really look at it. And so what are your thoughts on that? Oh, excuse me, go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say that one of the aspects which Vallée, of course, coming from France, was able to give us was the fact that French intelligence agencies were interested in the use of microwaves as weapons back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And his diaries do record a number of meetings where he was talking to French officials about just that, some of them fairly high up in the French government. And Vallée really gave us some good insights into the fact that the French intelligence agency, at least in that country, were visiting the US, openly talking about microwaves as weaponry. But at the same time, those French experts were also wanting to talk to UFO researchers. Again, I guess coming back to this aspect of trying to use sightings and data you get from sightings and injuries to people to see what you could learn from the UFO phenomena and then apply to weaponry. So there's a lot.
And Keith, you're breaking up a little teeny bit, so hopefully we can get you back up and running and hear what you're saying. But it is interesting that the French intelligence community, among many other intelligence communities, were interested in this and the use of microwaves, and that should be evident when you look back at some of the things and the non-lethal weapons testing and people that were specifically involved here in the United States of America. And you look at the portfolio, or you look at the resume of Dr. Eric Davis and some of the people, Dr. Hal Puthoff, and you look at some of the things that they are into and have been researching. It really seems to have very little to do with UFOs and all about developing weapons technologies. And so it is curious, and I think that's an important thing to make sure that we are monitoring while we're trying to weave our way through, what is UFO research? What is a UFO? What is a UFO, and what are these people doing behind the scenes to use the UFO topic to hide covert projects?
Yes, definitely. And I think the fact is that we do have to do some fairly broad reading to keep across all of these things. In recent times, I know you found a number of US government publications which talk about these areas, which may then be applied to research into the UFO phenomena or used as a cover for research that's being done by agencies in the US. And I guess we need more of us to be looking into this area and sharing the information we find, because it really does cast a different perspective on the whole topic. And Vallée, for many, many years, probably since as far back as the 1970s, was warning us about what he saw as the reach of US intelligence agencies into the UFO phenomena and the interference they were creating within the UFO research community.
And that is definitely something that I would love to talk to you a little bit more about when we get back from break, because I think, from what I've seen, there's some people that have been in the subject for decades, and for whatever reason, they kind of feel that the intelligence community was only really interested up until the 60s, and then that kind of dropped off. And I'm kind of stamping my feet on the ground saying that's not the case at all. They're still very, very active in all of this, and I think that's something to let people know that are getting into this for the first time. It's important to understand the different intelligence, communities or people that, or private contractors who have a vested interest in giving us information that is leading us away from the truth, because that's the way it rolls in that regard.
Well, that's right, yes. And it is something that perhaps people coming fresh into the subject may not even think about. It's the role of intelligence agencies in the whole history of the phenomena. And certainly it didn't stop in the 60s. It continues today, as we well know. And we can find little bits of evidence that crop up from time to time which would support the fact that that still is continuing.
And so before we've got 3 minutes to break, can you just provide like one instance where that is still happening today?
Well, I think we look at the current history of secret aircraft, where we're well aware that prototypes are being tested in the US. And here in Australia, we've got a range called the Woomera rocket range, which has been going since the 1950s. And that, a couple of years ago, hosted a very, very secret British stealth drone, which was out here for a while, causing sightings in the mid-north of our state. So those sort of use by the military and by intelligence agencies of programs which are, I guess, a secret to some extent that we just find out a little bit about. What they're being used for is, or a cover for them, is the UFO phenomena. So if somebody reports the sighting of a prototype aircraft, the Department of Defense or an agency will say, well, no, sorry, that was something to do with UFOs, or will skewer the story around in the media that, no, that's something to do with a strange phenomena, or a host of drones are being tested here. But no, look to the left when we want you to look to the right. Thank you very much. So that's probably a good example is prototype secret aircraft being tested.
I love that. Thank you so much, because that is really critical, I think, to a lot that is at play right now. And I love your work. Thank you for being here. This is a great show. I'm here with Keith Basterfield. You can go to ufoscientificresearch.blogspot.com to read all of his articles. I would highly recommend it if you have a vested interest in learning about the subject and not just joining the true believers. This is important stuff. I'm Erica Lukes. We will be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
This landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome to the second half of UFO Classified. I want to thank all of my listeners and supporters from all over the world. It has been really exciting to see the word about the show, about my research, about the things taking place at Skinwalker Ranch, about that growing and getting out there. We have a huge following over in Europe now, thanks to Chris Marks going out and doing his shows, and also a show that I did with UFOs Denmark. I think this is important, because when you have a global reach, it makes it all the more powerful, and you also get people who aren't so caught up in the dynamics, the dysfunctional dynamics in the United States and some of the games that are being played over here. So we are. I am very grateful for people who are listening from all over the world. We had a caller last week that stayed up late, Andy from Germany, and that was really cool to have somebody call in and ask questions about the Nimitz and specific things with regard to my guest Mick West, who is really has been pushing the boundaries. He watched the most recent episode of the new Skinwalker show, and they had a helicopter in there, and everybody was concerned about that and saying that this is something unusual. And he actually tracked down the people that were flying the helicopter, and they were actually surveying power lines and different things in the areas. So it is good to do your due diligence, to ask questions. And that's one thing I didn't do when I first started in the subject, because I believed what was being presented to me. And I now know that is simply just stupidity on my part. So always ask questions. My guest this evening is a very intelligent and thorough person when it comes to researching this. He's been around, he's seen a lot of things, and has interacted with a lot of the people who have been kind of steering the narrative and creating cover stories. Keith Basterfield is, in my opinion, Keith, your work to me is some of the most important work that we could ever look at with regard to this subject. And I mean, I can't thank you enough for just all of your insight to me. But then when I look back at your blog, this is really critical for new people coming into the field.
Well, thank you very much for the compliment, Erica. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny, like I mentioned, when I came into this, I was so naive, and I really believed the best in people. And, I kind of looked at some of the people that I'm now finding a lot in common with, and thought, oh, this is, these people are just trying to debunk things, and this is real and different things. And I slowly, after a series of experiences that were personal and things that I could look at, I just thought, oh my gosh, there's so much more here, and we deserve the best. We deserve good information, and that is why I've just I really hold you in high regard. Not to say that so many times, but I'm going to, because I do.
Well, I think over the years, one does grow in knowledge and experience. And I guess one of the things that I've always thought of is, don't assume that someone won't tell you something, which is probably the reverse of what we've been talking about earlier. I got into the habit of just asking people, do you have this? Have you seen this? Is it possible to get a copy of this? And just occasionally you'll be very surprised, and you'll end up with a document that you thought you'd never ever see out of somebody. Unfortunately, what's happening today is documents and items are being leaked on the internet. Suddenly you'll find someone's released a whole host of paperwork to do with MUFON. No source acknowledged apart from the mysterious alias of David Vincent. And for those people who've been around for 50 years, you'll know that David Vincent was the lead character in a TV show in the 60s, and I think it was the 60s, called The Invaders. So somebody had a sense of humor in giving that alias out. But you wonder, well, who has this material and who's leaking this material about MUFON and other documentation? I mean, the Admiral Wilson document is an excellent example of something which got dropped onto the internet. No one's ever acknowledged being the person who put it up there. And although we've unraveled the history of its provenance now, for a start, you just weren't certain as to whether or not, because somebody puts it up there anonymously, whether you can treat the documentation seriously. So that's probably an example of where I wish we had more transparency, where people would say, well, look, I've got this document. It seems important. Why I want to put it out there is for peer review. I want people to take it to pieces. I want people to ask questions. I want people to probe. I don't want people to just accept the fact that this piece of documentation is genuine or not. And I wish we did have more of that, but quite often it is just material being dropped anonymously, which doesn't help us to any great extent.
And I absolutely agree with you. And I know, we look at, and I'll go back to the Popular Mechanics article with Tim McMillan, and we've got this 500-page Bass report, and we were supposed to have other sources that were coming out with that, but I have not seen anybody else that has come out to verify that. Have you heard anything more about that?
Yes, I did see one tweet by Politico journalist Brian Bender, who announced in a tweet a couple of months ago that he'd actually seen that document himself. And he thought it was very odd that it was like a bound copy. He said he'd never ever seen a government, well, he called it a government document, even though it was put out by Bass under a contract. He said he'd never seen a US government document quite like it. And although he wasn't saying it wasn't genuine, he just thought it was odd that there was only sort of one copy being circulated. But he did confirm that he had actually seen it himself. And it was also referenced by a writer, journalist for the Washington Post way back in 2017 when the New York Times article came out. There was mention there of a 490-page document. And a lot of people then took that journalist's announcement about it. And if you have a look at the Defense Intelligence Agency's Freedom of Information log for the fiscal year 2018, you'll find a number of people have asked the DIA for a copy of that Bass document, even though they didn't know it was Bass at the time. They just said, I want a copy of the 490-page document that the Washington Post mentioned. And up until now, no one has got a response to those specific FOI queries with the DIA. But yes, someone else independently says they've seen it.
And that is interesting, and it does, and I always think when you've got, like you mentioned these documents that are being dropped out there from an anonymous source, or only one person has seen it, and then you look at for me, I've been looking at people people that are on Bigelow's payroll, that have been on Bigelow's payroll for a long time, that have had access to these, declassified documents, and they're the first people to release it, and all of these things, and you just sit back and go, okay, what is this about? Why is this person the only source of this, and what narrative is there to be spun out of all of these things? And I think with my reservation now with anything that is coming out about Bass from some sort of insider is that that somebody has maybe the person that's writing the article or something could somehow be influenced or compromised by this, and I think it's a very precarious situation to be in for people, because a lot of the new people in the field want to feel like they're journalists or they're important, and they're doing things that are groundbreaking, and they get a little pat on the back from somebody, and then they'll run with that. And that's really quite dangerous. And you know that because you never do that, and you are very thoughtful, and you've seen all of these things before.
Well, I think it does make you wary, and one of the things that I like to do is, I guess like any investigative journalist should be doing, is finding independent sources for this information. And a lot of the documents that are dropped onto the internet, we can't do that. We can't even confirm one source, let alone two. And so, for example, somebody working for the New York Times, the editors and fact checkers there, they just wouldn't put a story out if they hadn't got independent confirmation. I guess the release of the 3 videos is an example of that, where the New York Times went and got their own copies of the videos. They didn't rely on the copies that were being shown to them by other people. And that's true journalism. And I guess what people like Danny Silver and other bloggers like myself are trying to do is to live up to some of the journalistic standards of trying to double check our information before publishing stuff. But it does make it difficult when other people are just dropping documents without sources onto the net, and we have to take their word for it as to the fact that their source is genuine.
And then that is a really important point, and I think we lose that so much. It's been interesting to me to see, especially with all of the things that I've been coming out with regard to Skinwalker Ranch, to see some quote unquote journalists who have gone out there and just blatantly dismissed the idea. In fact, there's one specific person who has gone out there, written an article that is pretty much pro the new ranch team, and basically dismissed the idea of, the conspiracy theory, and then he lumps it in with an alien underground base and all of this, the conspiracy theory of non-lethal weapons testing. And I just thought to myself that if you call that journalism, that is not what that should be about. And so but again, in the UFO community, there is such, we get people that are, this is their first rodeo. They're coming out there. They've never done this before. They are trying their best, but then they get influenced by people that are very adept at steering narratives, people in the intelligence community, people that want to make sure that we're not looking over here. We should be looking over here because nothing's really going on. And so I think maybe some of the people that are coming out in this and getting their ego stroked might be under the influence of some of these people. But what are your thoughts about that? Because you've seen this over the years, and I'm sure you've seen people who've been susceptible to being steered.
Yes, I guess it's always an issue for anyone, including journalists and researchers, that when you are offered, say, a tour of a particular facility, you have to question, well, why am I being offered this at this point in time? Am I being offered this because the person who runs the operation wants the publicity right now for their own purposes, or are they genuinely willing to open up to the general public about it? And this is one of the things you always are concerned about, is who is funding your research. And that's one thing I love about Jack Valet. He's always maintained throughout his investigative career a neutral approach, that he will not appear on various television shows, documentaries, because of the motivations of the individuals who are making those documentaries or TV shows. And that's something I think we should all think about, that if we're offered the opportunity of a free tour through the command center of Skinwalker Ranch today, is why am I being offered this? Am I being used as a person to promote this research? Am I being used as a person who is naive? Am I being used as a person who really should be asking other questions? And perhaps I won't ask those questions because it might mean that I can't get access to the material that I'm being offered. So it is a tightrope that you have to walk sometimes. I mean, numerous times I've been offered pieces of information by insiders, and you sit on it for several months thinking about it. What's the source? What's their motivation in offering you this? And then quite often I've gone back and declined to publish anything about that at all, because it just seems that there is an ulterior motive behind the offer. And I think we've all got to be very wary of those kind of approaches, and we do get them from time to time.
And thank you so much, because I know since I came out and became a public person in this subject, I have gone through this. I have learned firsthand a lot of lessons that I now look back on and just go, really, what was I thinking? People approach you under the guise of, hey, we're doing this groundbreaking research and we want to help you and we like your work, and then you fall into this rabbit hole, or you're beholden to a specific person or group or of individuals because they've allowed you to a behind the scenes glimpse. And I think that I have learned that lesson the hard way. And so for me, I really stress to people that are new in this subject to not get caught up in the glitz and the glam of things. And because people are talking to you and you think that's cool, to maybe step back, like you say, and give it time. And then always question the motivations of people. That is really important. Those are important words.
Yes, and I think it's up to people who've been in the field for a while to caution others that may be new to it, to just think about it and offer some guidance based on your own experience. And then it's up to the individual concerned whether or not they go ahead and get involved in a podcast or a TV documentary or a film, because in the long run, it is difficult to have any say in the editorial process. I see with the latest Skinwalker Ranch History Channel series, there have been a number of comments, even by Brendan Pugel on Twitter, that he was a little disappointed about how the History Channel has edited the filming that they did. And that seems to occur quite frequently with television shows, that the people who are appearing on them will say, well, that's taken out of context. The way it's been edited and put together wasn't really the true indication of what I was trying to put across. And of course, you've got no recourse. You can't come back after the show's been shown to millions of people and say, well, I didn't really mean to say that. It is so difficult. So you have to, I guess, be wary in the first place about putting yourself in that situation of material which can later be edited in any way that the producer wants to do.
And absolutely, but it's my understanding, though, that he was one of the producers on the show and had a lot of creative liberty. So I wonder, at what point History Channel took over in the editing process and all of those things. So I think he had a little bit more leeway than most of us who would appear on TV shows. Yeah. So, yes. Which I think is interesting. And I also want to ask you about some of the content that has been put forward on the show. I know that for me, the llama experiment, the baby llama experiment, was particularly noteworthy. And from what I have been told by people that actually lived and worked on the property, there are reservation dogs or ranch dogs, wild dogs, that will go around. And this is pretty typical. But you're introducing a baby llama onto a property, and you're seeing you're seeing a blatant attack, and then the next week you've got a cow that is dead there, and the vet is saying that this is, pneumonia is the cause here, but then you're putting in all of these things, and it's like, to me, there's not a lot of tangible evidence there that anything extraordinary is happening. It's just that these circumstances of a helicopter flying over the property, or A, B, C, and D is taking place, but there's not a lot of meat behind it. But without getting too in depth, what are your thoughts on that?
My general view is that we're not seeing the results of good science. What we'd want to do is to see a complete, full report on the, in any instance. So, say, for example, the MESA that lit up in the infrared. I'd want to see some good, full detail and ask lots of questions about that. What we see on the television is just a fragment, an edited fragment of the whole story. And the same with the drilling that was done outside one of the homesteads. The material which was shown about gamma radiation gathered from rockets being fired into the sky. This is just playing with toys. What we want to see is some hard science and a report of exactly what was done, what frequencies were involved, what height something was recorded at. And we're seeing none of that. I know Brenton Frugal has said that he will be putting up a website with some of the hard science behind all these things up. But we haven't seen that yet. So a lot of this you can't really judge for yourself. You can only go on the tantalizing elements which are being shown on television, which is not the way science is done.
And those are, those are important points. And I hope that there are things that will be coming out to the public. I know that for myself, I've definitely brought up the fact that people like Chris Marks and Chris Bartell have potentially been exposed to things, and we have on records people from worked, with Bigelow and different things, and then also people on this show, the new show, that are talking about dangerous levels of radiation. But I posed to him, I hope that you can. Maybe you'll share with us the information that you learned from Bigelow, and maybe you can help people that are concerned about the implications for, the quality of their life. But it's Brandon specifically states that he has no information, that Bigelow didn't give him anything, and that they'll make information available to people like Chris Marks and Chris Bartell, which I hope that they would, since people that are on the ranch today are by their accounts being injured. So I would hope that information would come out in a steadfast and forthright manner.
Well, when you think about it, if what they're portraying on the television series is correct, and that there is danger from ionizing radiation, why on earth are they continuing with the show? Why not just close down the ranch and move off it? It's that logic that just seems so simple. You have a problem there, close the place down. Oh no, sorry, we can't do that because we're recording a TV show. It just defies logic.
Yes, absolutely, and you bring up some great points. This has been a really amazing show, and I can't wait for the last segment. I'm Erica Lukes here with Keith Basterfield. Make sure you go to ufoscientificresearch.blogspot.com to read everything that he has done. This is important if you care about the subject. You have to understand what you're dealing with, and I applaud you, Keith, for your work. I will be right back.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
One of the planet's most powerful antioxidant products is here for you to enjoy. Chaga Mushroom Tea. This tea has been used as a potent natural health solution for thousands of years. In fact, the Chinese call it King of the Herbs. The health value alone is worth a look, as Chaga Mushroom Tea packs a punch with pure vitality and smooth energy. It's 100% wild-crafted, safe, and effective. Get it now at arcticchaga.com. That's ARCTICCHAGA.com, or call 916-969-2678. That's 916-969-2678. Chaga Mushroom Tea. Chaga Mushroom Tea. Order your supply today.
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye, which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 Million Miles Till Midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
There is a world outside that which we live in. A realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1-hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
1, 2, 3, 4!
You are listening
to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds.
Love the music. All I listen to.
The future of radio is here and now.
Vegas, baby!
Vegas' #1 source for talk and new music.
How cool is that?
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the final segment of UFO Classified. It makes me sad to know that I've only got a specific, I've got, 20, 30 minutes to do the last segment because I love talking to the people that I bring on, and I feel that each person I am bringing on is giving you information, and it's important for you to get that and let it really sink in, because we are, very vulnerable in this community. When we're looking at this, it's very easy to get persuaded by people who are offering big, bright, shiny objects and are offering disclosure and are offering all of these things. When we look back at the history of the subject, this has happened decade after decade. Nothing new is taking place now, but unfortunately, you've got the internet, and so it is very easy to seed information, disinformation, and that it could be at our detriment. So I am here tonight with Keith Basterfield, who has been in this subject since the late 60s, who has been really digging in, who has met a lot of these people and has been very thoughtful and dedicated in the way he chooses to research. He has been a big help to me personally, and also in getting information out about Skinwalker Ranch and some of the questions that we have. And so I think, Keith, you are, again, I know I keep saying this, but you really, what you've done is really critical for all of us to understand. And you were mentioning on the break, which I think is amazing, the fact that, some of the younger people that have been in this for a short period of time should try to reach out to older researchers to get their mentorship, to get ideas. And when I was, involved in this, and I just was kind of on the tail end of my MUFON time, I was very lucky that I could, and I worked really hard actually to find people like Barry Greenwood, and you need to establish trust with some of these people, because they get a lot of people. You guys, I'm sure, all get people that are not, they're kind of they're not really dedicated to the subject. They're not going to sink their teeth in, and you never know what the motivations are. But there are people like myself who are willing to take the deep dive, and it has been so important for me over the years to have Barry Greenwood, Jan Aldrich, to have you, and you have taught me a great deal, and so I think that's important for that. And so give us a little bit of your thoughts on that and how we can become better when we're just new in this subject to really find the truth.
I think the first thing that I would suggest to people is yes, try and make contact with somebody who's been in the field for a while, express your interest. And what is very useful is trying to find an area that interests you. The whole topic is so broad these days that you can spend your entire research career just looking at one aspect of the phenomena. So I would suggest to people that they look at something which interests them, perhaps utilizes their own talent. Are they interested in biology? Are they interested in physics? Are they interested in astronomy, propulsion systems, secret aircraft, anything which will give you a bit of an insight into the topic? And then approach somebody who is an expert in these areas. I have a few go-to people. There's a Canadian chap who is a specialist, still an amateur, but a specialist in satellites and satellite re-entries, Ted Molskan. There are other people that I use who are in the Weather Bureau, who I go to when I want weather information. And so I have a whole network that I built up. It takes a while to do that, but I would suggest it's well worth somebody who's new to the subject to approach a few people and say, well, can I just have a few minutes of your time, maybe a little short Skype conversation? Can you point me to some of your works that you've done, books that are worthwhile reading, and also to ground yourself in the history of the subject? Because when BAS were down in South America looking and talking to people about UFO propulsion, that took me back to the 1950s, where, I think it was about 1955, the Douglas Aircraft Company had a project looking at UFO propulsion. And Barry Greenwood uncovered about 100 pages of documentation that I'd never seen. And it was only one day I was talking to Barry and I said, have you got anything on this? And he said, yes, I've got a file on it. And here was the very documentation about this particular program. And they were going to do the same things. They did a literature search. They talked to experts in propulsion fields. They put together a paper on this and they published it. And then later in the late 60s, another group of people in an aerospace company said, oh, we want to learn about propulsion systems. And so they convinced the management of the aerospace company to give them $500,000 to do a project for a couple of years on UFOs and UFO propulsion. And they reinvented the wheel. They didn't seem to know about the 1955 study. And then Bigelow Aerospace pops up, and the Bigelow Foundation, and then NIDS, and then BAS, and now the TTSA. They all don't seem to learn from history. Apart from networking with people who've been in the field for a while, learning a bit about the history will save you a lot of time in reinventing the wheel. So those are a couple of tips that I've learned over the years and put into practice myself.
And I love that, and that is so important. To me, it is really cool to see people from all over the world taking an interest in this. And there, I think, there's a big counter movement taking place, and people are understanding that what is, the disclosure movement is really not about disclosure. It's about creating more smoke screens. And so I'm glad to know that there are people, and this is gaining traction all over the world. I think that's really important. People are fed up with all of this, and they're turning to people like you and Barry Greenwood to get answers for things, and I love it. There's a whole history about this out there, and you make a great point. You have to look at the history of the subject, because everything it repeats, and you get a younger generation in there that again can be, hey, here are the MJ-12 documents. Let's run with that one, because that's something new to a younger generation, but they don't realize the games behind MJ-12, and they need to be, obviously shown some of these things. And so it's all fascinating. But I want to ask you, because I'm getting a question from Ben Hyde in chat, and he wants to know if you know anything about a facility, Exmouth near, and I hope I'm pronouncing that the right way. It's a radar station.
Yes. In Western Australia, which is maybe 3,000 kilometres, so a fair distance from me, there is what was a joint US Navy and Australian Government Department of Defence installation, which has been there since the 60s, at a place called Exmouth. And there is a facility which has, I think, towers which are about 1,000 feet high, which are used for transmission to submarines. And there have been a lot of interesting sightings around that installation over the years. Something that Paul Dean, my colleague in Melbourne, and I have published a number of blog posts about. So if you were to go to my blog and just put in Exmouth, you'll turn up several blogs and a whole history of sightings in that area. Today, that facility is mainly run by the Australian government, but for years it was run by the US Department of Defence. So I think that's what the question is referring to.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying. And I want to, Paul Dean has done great research, and I know that you've worked with him, and he has a blog called UFOs Documenting the Evidence. And so that is definitely worth a read as well, because he digs deep into this subject and does FOIA requests and all of this. And so it's another great resource. And so I want to talk about, because we've got a few minutes before show close, but you have about the recent FOIA request, 2013, 2014, the East Coast encounters. Can you give us more information on that?
Yes, this was particularly interesting that both the New York Times and the War Zone media, Drive media outlet, both came up with roughly at the same time. That we've always been looking for some documentation behind the anecdotes we've been given on places like the Unidentified Show, where pilots, US Navy pilots, are saying, well, I've heard about these incidents, or this is what happened to me. And we've been thinking, well, if pilots were putting in hazard reports saying, well, I nearly collided with some unknown object, it would be important if we could find some documentation. Well, both the New York Times and the War Zone put in FOI requests, and a couple of months ago, as I understand it, got documents from the US Navy. And they found, I think, 9 episodes or 9 incident reports which mentioned some form of unknown object. And what's interesting there is that here we have the words of the pilots involved rather than anecdotes that we're hearing or hearsay. And the reports are describing unknowns, which doesn't mean to say that they're extraterrestrial, because the unknowns range from what looks like a quadcopter, an unmanned aerial system, a red balloon, a suitcase-sized object. Some were seen visually, some on radar, some both visually and on radar. But the main thing was that the pilots at the time could not identify most of these objects and were concerned enough to put in the possibility that there could have been a collision between an unknown object and aircraft. So I find that the fact that we've now got documentation, we can read out for ourselves what pilots were saying, is an extremely good advance in our knowledge about all of these things off the East Coast in 2014 mainly, and also some, there was one report from 2018 and another report from 2019, which we hadn't heard about extending into these later years. So that's these things still occurring, and there should be more documentation available on some of the other incidents that have been mentioned by pilots on podcasts and the TV series, which we haven't seen in this current batch of documentation which has come out. So for those that say that the FOI Act is useful, this is a demonstration of that. For those who say, well, really, we can't get much out under FOI, it's just an illustration that we can get some stuff and it is valuable to keep putting in these requests.
And you're right, and it does. I want to say that it does cost money to do a FOIA request, right?
What's interesting is that, say, for example, in this latest set of documents that have come out, the US Navy waives fees for some of these requests. So I thought always you were required to pay for them, but some of these things are being waived for whatever reason. It's almost as if they want the information out there at this time, whether or not that's because it adds to the smokescreen or whether or not it adds to the importance of the fact that the US Navy is taking a lead at the moment rather than the United States Air Force, who traditionally had the lead in this area. It's hard to say, but at least we're getting documentation out.
And that is absolutely correct. And so I just have to ask you, have you seen, when you're looking at all of this, I mean, historically, and then some of the current things that are taking place, do you see other countries that are engaged in the kinds of things that we are in the United States?
I think there's always those allegations and accusations made about many countries. But for example, my own experience here in Australia is that the people behind the FOI Act requests, when you talk to them individually and you put in a request and then they say, give us a phone call, we need to clarify something, you have a talk about them. I found our people here most helpful and not put off by the fact that you're looking at a subject such as UFOs. But other countries have extreme difficulty in extracting information. But what's particularly disappointing is the length of time that it takes to get FOI requests met. I've still got outstanding DIA requests to do with ASAP and ATIP that are now 2.5 years old. And apart from an initial acknowledgement of it and a number that I was assigned, I haven't heard another thing about it. So the length of time it takes is really disappointing. And I guess would put a lot of people off putting a request in if they thought, well, I'm not going to get an answer for 3 years.
Well, I'm glad that there are people, like yourself, that actually has the patience to do that, because it often it does have a great reward. And I want to ask, because we're getting ready to close the show, unfortunately, but I when people are throwing out, and I look at Bigelow and some of these groups, TTSA, you throw out UFO, you throw out UAP, and I think sometimes that could be very misleading because people have the idea that both of those terms mean extraterrestrial, and that is simply, in my opinion, not the case, and I think that's a really slippery slope. So how do you define that?
Well, I always like to get to the root cause of what is behind any particular sighting, so that if I'm looking at a case which to me is unknown, I'll revisit it periodically and I'll see if I can find any new information about it or add to it. And in that way, you can perhaps eliminate some of the things which are smoke screens and some of the things which are being thrown out to deliberately obscure your interpretation of a particular thing. So I never rule any particular explanation out. I like Mick West's interview that you did with Mick West the other day, where he said he never takes anything off his explanation list. He'll move it up and down a list, and he'll assign a higher probability to something, and that may change if he gets more information about it. And that's exactly the way that I've operated over the years. Some cases, such as the JAL Japanese pilots sighting something over Alaska in '86, I used to think that was a fantastic case until I did my own research into it. And I started to find holes in the explanations that were being put forward. So I think you should always revisit your favorite cases and have a fresh look at it, or encourage someone else to have a fresh look at it. And that really helps us over the years.
And I think that's important, because you see people in the research community and that are the idols of ufology, that they've created whole careers based on one case, and it would really take the second coming for them to actually change their mind or to say, hey, wait a minute, I've got new information and my thoughts and views on this have changed. And it's sad that people can't do that. And I'm sure they're scared of losing their revenue streams. And so maybe that's why they, will defend things until, the very end. But it's important, especially in a field like this, that you always know that things can change. And like you mentioned, Mick, and I thought that was a great way to do things, to move explanations up and down, given the information that you have. And it always seems to change. And so it's just everything is just fascinating with this, and I've learned so much about it. And you mentioned that it on the break that it's sad because you and I have both wanted to really look at the phenomenon, and unfortunately, because we've dug into it, what we're primarily focused on, or what we get caught up with, are the people and some of the games that are being played. So just tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that. That's important.
Yeah, I think the thing to always remember is that we're interested because we recognize that there is an unknown phenomena in play. Sometimes when I'm writing an article which is perhaps explaining my perspective on a particular sighting or experience or case, people come to me and say, well, you've sort of debunked this. I said, no, I haven't. What I've done is I put forward some facts which I've then led to a conclusion. And I'm quite open to have a debate and discussion about it. But the very reason that I've been interested for so many years now is because I still come back and remind myself every now and again that there is a core phenomena there, that whatever games people are playing, there is still a phenomena out there to be explored and to be interested in, and to never lose sight of that. So occasionally I think I just remind myself, let's go back to some of the things that I know that are definitely unknown. That is the reason for my motivation over the years. And we need to revisit that from time to time to just remind ourselves why we're in the field at all, is because there is a real phenomena, something that we have yet to explain.
Absolutely. I love that. And I want to ask a question from Jeff, who asked if there's more than one organization that collects UFO reports in Australia.
There, like in the US, we do not currently have a national level organisation equivalent to MUFON in Australia. We have organisations in most of our states. We have 7 different states and territories where we have investigation groups. But what we're finding more and more is with the internet, then we are networking rather than focusing on building up an organisation. We have a branch of MUFON in Australia. I know the guy who runs it here. He's very good. We share information between us about particular things that are going on. But where we used to have a national level organisation that I was part of, we've now devolved into more of a networking exchange of a number of serious researchers. So I hope that answers the question that's been put forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is interesting because we know when we go back through history and we look at the fact that Bigelow purchased the MUFON database and there were people's personal information that was compromised with regard to that. And there has been a big push by Bigelow and different people in the community behind the scenes to buy databases. And I think that is, so to me, that raises a lot of questions. I mean, what would you do if you had a UFO report? Would you feel safe reporting it to a particular place?
I'd be very cautious as to who I was approaching with my personal information like that. And strange you should say about the MUFON database. One of the little research projects that I've got on my book at the present moment is looking at the history of the MUFON case management system, their database, trying to find out how it was created, by whom, its value, what's being used for, who's got access to it, privacy concerns that have been expressed by people. And that's something that I have been thinking about of late. So that's quite a coincidence that you raised that question.
Well, I love that. And we've got a lot more to talk about. And I look forward to having you on the show again and talking with you privately. Like I said, I learned so much from you, and I appreciate everything that you've done. And you are a shining example of what to do right and critical questions that we all should be asking. And I love it. So thank you, Keith, for being here. I want to just again point out UFOs, scientificresearch.blogspot.com. Go in there, grab a glass of wine, get a glass of water, do popcorn, whatever you're going to do, but spend some time and dig through this and learn the history, learn about the players, learn about the fact that this is, we're being shown the same thing decade after decade. It's just in a new bow, in a new package. And if we really truly want to make a change, and we want to get to the bottom of this and actually peel away from all of this smoke screen, then we need to look at all of this and the things that Keith has put out there. Keith, thank you so much for being here, and I wish you all the best. I hope that you and your loved ones are safe, and I will look forward to talking to you again. And thank you. And I want to just again stress to all of my listeners that I'm here for you. This is a show that is breaking a lot of ground, and I'm grateful to all of you for getting information out there. This is a critical time in this subject, and I hope all of you appreciate that. Get it out. I am Erica Luke. Stick around for a wonderful night on KCOR. I love Tina Marie. I love this network. Thank you for your support, and I will catch you guys next week.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting